5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we are recording. So once again, welcome to El Maestro Speaks podcast. So still the month of July. Like I said in the previous podcast, this is the Cordillera Administrative Region month, and the month where the conception of Cordillera Administrative Region started. Exactly, what date exactly? That is July 15. And since we are celebrating the Cordillera month, I would like to read an article here about Cordillera. It's written by Dr. Fernando Bahatan Jr. Since every time that we do a solo podcast, we are doing history, Igorot history, and history on our region, I would like to read this to you. Cordillera Autonomy, Looking Around and Farther Back. Again, written by Fernando Bahatan Jr. And if Sir Fernando is listening, I hope I can have you in my podcast soon, so you can lay out in detail this paper that you have written. This paper was posted in April 24, 2009 in the NEDA website. So since every time we do podcasts, like I said a while back, or a solo podcast, when we're not having conversation with other people, so that we are focusing on history, on the Igorot history. This paper is, what they did in this paper is it traced the history of how the Cordillera Administrative Region came to be, and the travails of attaining the autonomy of the region. So what I want to do here is I'll be reading the paper and I'll be giving my personal opinion on the matter that was read on the topic. So to start with, again, this paper was written by Fernando Bahatan Jr. The first part, and by the way, if you want to read this, you can find this in the, like I said, the NEDA, car.neda.gov.ph. You can just search it there. And on the paper, he cited some further readings, if you want to research on what he has written. I will not be citing them here. Anyway, you can just find it here because there's a lot of it, and I was trying to find this sightings that he had, or the citations that he gave. It seems we're not having enough time for research. That's why I did not continue. Anyway, I trust that this author researched this well. Okay, so without further ado, let's start. Number 1 is the self-governing and autonomous tribes in the Cordilleras. The primitive tribal villages in the Cordilleras had their own customary laws, practices on all matters: land, personal relation, property, forest, natural resources, holidays, sickness, death, farming, defense of homeland and people, invasions by other tribes or people, victory, a successful journey or hunting, among others. They were self-governing and autonomous. They used and developed their natural resources in the way they saw fit and were capable of, with consideration not only of the needs of their generation, but also of future generation. They used their own food. They carried barter trade with other tribes and with their lowland populace. They fought the Spanish, American, Japanese colonizers to protect their homeland, the natural resources therein, and their culture. They also fought against one another for the same reason and for revenge or to show their superiority. They fought the Philippine government or its instrumentalities that imposed on them some national laws, forestry laws in particular, or projects, the Chico Dam, Selophil. They also fought against insurgents in certain ways when their values and culture were threatened. In their fight and battles, sometimes they win and sometimes they lost. They have always been proud of their culture. They consider it honorable to die fighting for it. So, like it was stated before, in this paragraph, so the Cordillerans, or people living the Cordillera, are proud of their culture. So they fought all these elements that they see are a threat to their cultures. An example cited here is the Chico Dam project that was opposed, which I think led to the death of Makliing Dulag during the time or the martial law. So to continue, while colonization, modern governance, modern education, foreign religion, and other external influences made great inroads on the way of living and thinking of the tribal communities, many customary laws and practices of great forebears are still alive and being practiced today, although with some modifications. This early scenario of tribal villages and people is confirmed by writings of early and even modern foreign writers, missionaries, and other authorities who also attest to the love of these tribes for freedom and independence, even their passion to show their courage, determination, and superiority at least in their own thinking, even if their enemy had better weapons. This primitive self-governance or autonomy of tribal communities is the root of struggle for modern Cordillera regional autonomy, at least for some Cordillera revolutionaries, intellectuals, activists, and other advocates for Cordillera regional autonomy. So, just tracing back the history of the people of the Cordillera, like in the past podcast we already talked about it, we discussed about the hidden history, not so hidden now, of the Igorots that were unconquered by the Spaniards for 3 centuries, right? And their courage to fight for their freedom, even if they don't have superior weapons, right? These are the traits that shows that the Igorots or the Cordillerans love their autonomy, right? Continue. The emergence of autonomy among the Cordillerans in the Communist Party of the Philippines. So the first one is that we trace that even way back in the olden times, we the Cordillerans or the Cordillera people love our autonomy, love freedom, and we can trace history and we can see it in the writings of foreign missionaries and foreign writers telling that or showing it in their writing that Igorots love their freedom and they will fight for it. So in the modern times, we'll be talking about the emergence of autonomy among Cordillerans in the Communist Party of the Philippines or the New People's Army. So in this article, we'll be looking on how this thought of autonomy came about in the leftist group. The CPP-NPA movement entered the Cordilleras first through the province of Ifugao in 1970. Then moved to the other provinces of the Cordillera. Many native Cordillerans joined the movement for various reasons. Many believe that the NPA came to help them defend their right and homeland being abused by national government and its instrumentalities. Some joined in order to escape arrest for crimes they committed or take revenge for crimes committed against them or their families. Others thought that it was a good and interesting adventure and opportunity for a better life. Various NPA units were organized in the Cordilleras. In 1974, there were already company-sized formations. In some towns, there were shadow governments of the CPP-NPA. So that during the 70s, that's when the CPP-NPA group really came to have this power that they have, and a lot of Cordillera people were, attracted to join the group for various reasons, as stated above. Some native Cordilleran cadres started to question the purpose of the CPP-NPA and its military and political strategies in the light of several abuses committed against the people and in the light of certain failures in their operations. In 1972, Ka Elias Mario Pugong of Fongduan, Ifugao, and Ka Benji or Ka Juling William Falugay of Bontoc Mountain Province proposed to the CPP-NPA Central Command the formation of Igorot Liberation Army or ILA, the Federation of Tribes for Liberation or FITL. The former would be the military component and the latter would be the civilian component. They believed that the tribes in the Cordilleras had a culture and terrain different from the lowlands and therefore should be treated somewhat differently. The military units in the Cordillera should be given certain freedom or autonomy in their political and military sorties. Some who believed in the proposal but were afraid of the possible punishment opted to keep silent. Others did not support the proposal out of jealousy. The proposal was flatly rejected by the CPP-NPA Central Command. The two proponents were severely scolded and sent for some time to the Cagayan Valley, far away from their own tribes and homeland and co-cadres. The idea of the two was forgotten. So, because many of us know about the story of Father Conrado Balueg and his formation of the Cordillera Liberation Army. But before him, there were some members of the NPA who proposed this formation of, the mountain province, liberation, or the Igorot Liberation Army and Tribe for Liberation. So it is like it's the early formation of the idea of autonomy, wherein they saw the difference of the culture of the lowlands and somewhat difference of the culture of the lowland to the culture of the people in the highland. Now take note that it does not mean that the people's culture in the Cordillera are all the same. We'll be discussing about that later. But they saw the huge difference of the culture of the people living in the highland, and that's what led them to think of this autonomy here and the formation of the ILA and the Federation tribe Now take note, these people came from the NPA, but this NPA Central Command rejected it. And because of this idea, they were severely scolded, as this article said, and they were sent to Cagayan Valley. Right? A larger and enhanced idea of autonomy resurrected in 1986, particularly among members of the Lombaya Company of the NPA stationed in Kalinga. Under the leadership of Kaambo, or Father Conrado Balwag, a Tingyan from Abra, and then the political officer of the Lombaya Company, the Cordillera People's Liberation Army was formed in March 1, 1986, with twin purpose of defending the Cordillera homeland and its people, and to push for the Cordillera Autonomy.
Sponsor time! So this podcast is brought to you by Dems Auto Performance. Dems Auto Performance Shop offers automotive servicing and verify sila ng kahit anong klase ng sasakyan. Wallang Aeroplano, located at Alapang, Trinidad, Benguet. Of course, they also offer off-road servicing. Sa mga naglalaro ng off-road, gusto mong pa-convert ang sasakyan sa off-road, you can visit Dems Auto Performance at Alapang, Trinidad, Benguet, or you can also visit their Facebook page, Dems Auto Performance.
It was able to get the open support of many cadres and tribal leaders and members in the Cordillera. It formally split from the CPP-NPA on April 7, 1986, due to ideological and tactical differences. It was so far the most successful secessionist group from the CPP-NPA. No other group had separated from the CPP-NPA with solidness and numbers of arms retained by the group. It heeded the call of then President Aquino for peace and reconciliation. So, this Father Conrado Balwag has made history here, because his group, the group that he formed, the Cordillera Liberation Army, or Cordillera People's Liberation Army, was the only group that was able to secede or get out of the CPP-NPA with so much solidness in number of arms as stated by the article. At the same time, the CPP, or CPLA rather, the Cordillera Liberation Army, was the one who campaigned so hard for the formation of regional Cordillera Autonomous Region, of course headed by Father Conrado Balwag. And like I said a while ago, and this is an open call, if the son or daughters of Father Conrado Balwag is listening to this podcast, that I would like to be having conversations with them and be talking about their father and his ideologies. So after the formation of this Cordillera People's Liberation Army, this was during the 1986, late 80s. The president then was the first woman president of the Philippines. It's President Corazon Aquino. And Aquino called for a reconciliation, a peace talk, and that's where the CPLA heeded or listened to that call, which led us to the next topic: the attempts of reconciliation for the Old Mountain Province. So there will be, later, the topic about the reconciliation. But before we go there, let's talk about the regionalization of the Old Mountain Province. Now take note that there's what we call the Old Mountain Province. That division was formed during the time of the Spaniards and the Americans. Now, before we came to the Cordillera Administrative Region that we know today, there was an attempt to bring back the Old Mountain Province. Okay. And Presidential Order Number 1 of then President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. divided the country into 13 regions, supposedly for better administration planning and development. So I remember way back before I was reading an old book, and we saw that there are only 13 regions in the Philippines, and there was no Cordillera. I mean, they don't have that. What do you have in the south? The autonomous region for Muslim Mindanao, and we don't have the Cordillera in this region. Now, according to this article, it says that the presidential order number 1 of the then President Marcos was the reason for this. The old mountain province, composed then of 4 provinces and 1 city, was not made as one region. Instead, the provinces of Ifugao and Kalinga Apayao, Kalinga in the Apayao are one province back then. So the provinces of Ifugao and Kalinga Apayao were placed under Region 2, or the Cagayan region, Region Valley. Cagayan Valley, I should say. And the provinces of Benguet, Mountain Province, and the city of Baguio were placed under Region 1, or the Ilocos region. With this arrangement, the above provinces were somehow miniaturized and got less attention in terms of fund allocation and development projects, which was understandable during that time. So I remember I heard stories before of because Benguet is under the Region 1. There's some stories of instead of well, these are some anecdotal stories said. I happen to maybe it is true, and I just want to relate to you that say for example in the field of teaching, majority of those teachers being hired to teach in the highlands were from the lowlands, and sometimes the a highlander applicant is often overlooked. Okay, somehow they are prioritizing the people in the lowlands because the regional offices back then is located in the lowlands. Okay, now whether that story is true, other situations will show that somehow people in the highlands were not prioritized. Okay, and a lot of people can attest to that, especially those who lived during that era. In 1976, the governors of these 4 provinces forwarded a resolution to President Marcos asking for a separate region for the old mountain province coverage, but the request had not been granted. Assemblymen or representative in the Congress of Ifugao and Baguio, namely Jess Paredes and Honorado Aquino, respectively filed separate bills in the Batasan for a separate mountain province region. The bill did not prosper. So, even way back before, maybe the people saw the disadvantage of being included in the region of the lowlands. That's why they tried to pass for the revitalization or regionalization of the old mountain province during the olden times, American times, but it was not granted by then President Marcos. Now we're back to Father Conrado Balwag and President Corazon Aquino on the Mount Data Sipat. After the exchange of letter between Vice President Laurel and Father Conrado Balwag, the series of preliminary peace talks between Presidential Emissary Agapito Butch Aquino and members and leaders of the Cordillera Bodong Association, or the CBA, and the CPLA were held in Sagada Mountain Province and Tinglayan, Kalinga. On September 13th, at the Mount Data Hotel at Mount Data, Baoco Mountain Province, a sipat means first step towards peace talks, was performed between the CPLA and the Republic of the Philippines. During the SIPAT, the CBA-CPLA and newly organized organization, the Montañosa National Solidarity (MNS), presented to President Aquino a paper entitled "Towards the Solution of the Cordillera Problem: A Statement of Position." This paper outlined the root of the Cordillera problem and contained 26 specific demands that touch on political, social, economic, cultural, military, police, and foreign relation matters. These demands, according to the paper, if addressed, would end the armed struggle and usher in peace in the Cordilleras. The President committed to have the demands tackled formally during the peace talk. So they have this demand, and according to them, the CBA-CPLA, of course, that was represented by Commander Baluag, is that if these demands were addressed, then that would end all the armed struggles and it will bring peace to the Cordilleras. Now, during this time, the Cordilleras are somewhat the nest of the leftist or of groups against the government. So, in the mind of the president, maybe way back then, he thought that if she can have the negotiation with this army, then at least the problem of the armed struggle would ease for a little bit. So these are some of the demands. Demand number one is the recognition by the national government of the autonomy of various ethno-linguistic groups in the Cordillera. So that's the first one that was demanded, that the national government would recognize the autonomy of people in the Cordilleras. The demand number 4 says here is for national government to guarantee the independence and freedom of the Cordillera nation in preserving, consolidating, and developing the socialist way of life and moral order indigenous to its homelands. And the next, you have this demand number 6 is for the national government to set up a federal republic of the Philippines that allow the existence within the framework of autonomous and co-equal states, including Cordillera Autonomous Socialist State. Now take note that the army that wrote the paper are leftist, so they are pro-socialist government. And during the SIPAT, the new armed forces of the Philippines and CPLA entered into an agreement for cessation of hostilities. So, this SIPAT has brought in a ceasefire, or what do you call it? Yes, a ceasefire or a temporary peace between the two armed forces, the CPLA and the Philippine Army. And there are some few readings here if you want to read. But moving on, we have the peace talks and groups involved. So continuing the SIPAT, of course, is further peace talks. And the peace talks formally started on December 15, 1986, after that SIPAT. We have this peace talk on December 15, 1986 at the mansion in Baguio City with Presidential Emissary Agapito Aquino as the chief convener. The idea of having other groups in the Cordillera aside from the CBA-CPLA was suggested by the convener as early as October 1986, to which the CBA-CPLA agreed. Hence the organization of the Cordillera Broad Coalition in November 1986. The three main groupings during the initial negotiation that were given representations in the Cordillera negotiating panel were the CBA-CPLA, the CPA or the Cordillera People's Alliance, and the CBC, Cordillera Broad Coalition. The CPLA, it believed that the root cause of the problem was the Regalian-based national laws over the people's indigenous land laws. It argued that regional autonomy was a valid demand and the correct measure whereby the tribes' right, cultural identity, and integrity and their historic struggle are recognized and whereby the tribes can meaningfully participate in their own development. It wanted enshrined in an organic act for Cordillera Autonomous Region the establishment of a regional peacekeeping force which should not only modern military features but also cultural rooted ones and with CPLA as the core group. In the CBA, their point is it is a confederation of tribes. It had its immediate roots in the tribal organization, particularly the United Communities of the Cordillera or the UCC, and the Kalinga-Bontoc Peace Pact Holders Association. The UCC was formed in Tiempo Tubo Abra in 1979 with the objective of consolidating the tribes for the protection and defense of their homelands and rights that were threatened by the cellophane logging and pulp making operations in Abra. It was suspected of being a subversive movement. Many of its leaders and members were arrested or harassed, causing the organization to have a short life. The Bontoc and Kalinga tribes affected by the proposed Chiku Dam project had to use a different name in order to avoid being tagged as a subversive movement. The organization was Kalinga-Bontoc Peace Pact Holders Association. Pursuant to the agreement reached during the Second Congress held in Bontoc on January 23, 1984, to make the KBPHA a Cordillera-wide organization, the KBPPHA was renamed Cordillera Budong Association. The CBA had been its earlier years supportive of the NPA, for the latter helped organize it. It later split from the CPP-NPA. There was also a split within the CBA. One group was headed by its chairman, Mario Yagao, supported the CPLA, and the other group, headed by Vice Chairman Daniel Ngayaan, supported the NPA and newly formed CPA. After the death of Ngayaan, his group ceased to exist. The autonomy demand the CBA included the organization of the bilateral Budong as a fundamental basis for socio-economic political relationship among tribes and the Ili as the basic political unit and the tribe's territorial area as larger political unit. It proposed a federation of tribes along ethno-linguistic groupings to be recognized as the equivalent of a province and the confederation of tribes as the equivalent of region. So this is for the CBA and what their objectives are. For the CPA, or the Cordillera People's Alliance, it was organized in Bontoc Mountain Province on June 1-3, 1983, during a land congress called by the Cordillera Budong Association. It was composed mostly of professionals. Initially, its main purpose was the sourcing out of funds for the CBA and the tribes. Later, it became the umbrella organization of several organizations. Its main autonomy demands include the recognition of ancestral domain of tribes and their indigenous political system that were still in practice and the control and management of lands and resources of the autonomous region by the Cordillera Autonomous Government. It was the main organization that carried out a persistent and sustained lobby among members of the constitutional commissions to provide a Cordillera Autonomous Region in the new constitution. For several years, the CPA remained the most consistent, persistent, and implacable critic of the CPLA and its former chief, Conrado Balweg. During the peace negotiation, the CPA, after vacillating in its decision to join or not to join the Cordillera negotiating panel, finally rejected the slots in the negotiating panel given to it and instead decided to bring its demands directly to the national government and to the National Democratic Front. Then we have here the CBC. The CBC, upon the suggestion of the presidential emissary, this group was organized on November 11, 1986 to be the umbrella organization of all groups not linked to CPLA or CBA in the peace negotiation. Most of the members of the CBC were professionals. The CPA did not want to be under CBC in the negotiation. It claimed to have more organization members, so it should be the umbrella organization during the peace talks, not the CBC. The CBC died a natural death when the national government decided later to deal only with the CPLA or CBA. During its membership in the first Cordillera negotiating panel, it proposed that the regional charter should be evolved from the provincial charters and that autonomy of the provinces should be respected by autonomous regional government. It proposed a Cordillera Regional Development Council as the interim regional setup pending the establishment of an autonomous region. This proposal minoritized the CPLA and the CBA group. The latter rejected the proposal. And we have here next the new ROP panel and the new CBA CPLA panel signed the interim Cordillera Regional Administration or the ICRA on June 9, 1987 at mansion in Baguio City amidst protest by some CBC and CPA members and attorney Sergio Kawi, who walked back and forth alone at the gate of the mansion bearing a protest placard. The ICRA was the main basis for the issuance of the Executive Order number 220 by President Aquino. It had many provisions adopted in the EO 220. So, just to have a rundown here, so that Executive Order 220, after a total of 7 months of peace talks, President Aquino signed on July 15, 1987. That's why we are celebrating the Cordillera Day on July 15, 1987, is because of the signing of the Executive Order number 220 creating the Cordillera Administrative Region, consisting of the provinces of Abra, Benguet, Ifugao, Kalinga Apayao. Back then it's Kalinga Apayao. Right now and nowadays, Kalinga is separated to Apayao. And Mountain Province, and of course the city of Baguio. The CPLA considered the EO 220 its minimum demand for a sustained peace in the Cordillera pending the establishment of an autonomous region. So, just going back to what happened here. So, I have read here the different groups involved in the peace talks. So we have here the CPA, we have the CBA. CPA is the Cordillera Liberation Army, and we have the CBA or the Cordillera Bodong Administration. We have the CBC, the Cordillera Broad Coalition, and we have the CPA, the Cordillera People's Alliance. Each of this group have their own vision and have their own demands for the Cordillera. I mean, they have their own vision of how an autonomous Cordillera should be formed, which is totally different from the other group. Now, take note that all of this group are clamoring for an autonomy, right? And they should be working together to talk to the national government. Now, what happened here is that each of this group has a different agenda, totally contradicting the other group, and that's one of the reason why, maybe one of the main reason why the autonomy for the Cordillera is not prospering, maybe until now, right? So one good thing came in the negotiation. This is the Executive Order 220, which is the signing for the creation of which is an executive order for the creation of the Cordillera Administrative Region, which is what we have right now. And the Cordillera Administrative Region is like a preparation for us to be an autonomous region. Now, according to this paper here, most of the provisions in the Executive Order 220 came from the proposals of the CBA CPLA. So moving on, so still in the Executive Order 220, in the 6.1, it says here, purpose and bodies created. The Cordillera Administrative Region has three purposes: administer the affairs of the government in the region as defined in Section 4 and 5 below of the Executive Order, accelerate the economic and social growth and development of the units of the region, prepare for the establishment of the autonomous region in the Cordilleras. So that is basically the reason for the formation of the Cordillera Administrative Region. Okay, 6.2, EO220 created 4 new bodies: the Regional Security Force, or the RSF, to assist in the defense and security of the region, subject to the guidelines issued by the President for this purpose, after consultation with the CAR, other organizations, and appropriate agencies of the government. The Cordillera Regional Assembly to act as the policy formulating body which will articulate and harmonize the interests and aspirations of the peoples of the Cordilleras. Number 3, Cordillera Executive Board to act as the development body and implementing arm of the Cordillera Administrative Region. Number 4, the Cordillera Budong Administration, CBA, formerly called Cordillera Budong Association, to act as a special commission within CAR under the supervision of the CAB. Its main responsibilities are to promote respect for the customs and usages of tribes concerned, to foster unity among the tribes, to promote regional confederation and the practice of direct democracy and collective leadership, to promote the communal social order and economic system. 6.3, protest against the EO and attempts to abolish it or amend it. The signing of the EO 220 raised fears and concern among some individual groups and local government units. There were lots of protests and private groups against EO 220. The city of Baguio and province of Benguet, including its 13 municipalities, forwarded to higher authorities resolution and petitions seeking exclusion from the coverage of the EO. There were cases filed in the Supreme Court questioning the constitutionality of the EO. In later years, the EO also did not sit well with the Cordillera Solons, who filed 7 bills to abolish or amend the EO. There were 2 Senate bills also filed for the same purpose.
Alright, so sponsor time. This podcast is sponsored by Cyspace Tech. Cyspace Tech po ko offer services like formatting, software installation, file recovery, printer resetting, kanda dumapay related to computer of course. And home service da po ti computer. So kung kayong makarwar, you can contact Cyspace Tech, CY Space Tech, through their Facebook page. Dahito'y Cyspace Tech po kat available lang in the locality of Mankayan.
Details of the cases filed in the Supreme Courts and attempts to amend the EO are here if you want to read it, but we will not be going through that. We just want to I just want you to know that the EO 220, the reason why we have the Cordillera Administrative Region, there are a lot of people who are against it. So there are some bills passed calling for the amendment or for the abolition, but it did not push through up until now. Number 7, autonomy provisions in the 1987 Constitution. Now, in the Constitution or the 1987 Constitution of the Philippines, there is a provision there stating that Cordillera regions and the Muslim Mindanao should have an autonomous region. So let's go. Let's continue reading this. While the Constitutional Commission was in drafting, debating stage of a new Philippine Constitution, and while the peace talk between the government panel and the CBA-CPLA panel was ongoing, the Cordillera People's Alliance lobbied members of the Commission for the inclusion of an autonomous region for the Cordillera, in spite of opposition of some Cordillera groups and local government officials. Regional autonomy for the Cordillera and Muslim Mindanao was enshrined in the new constitution that was ratified by Filipino people on February 2, 1987 in a plebiscite. The Section 15, Article 10 reads, "There shall be created autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao and in the Cordilleras consisting of provinces, cities, municipalities, and geographical areas sharing common and distinctive histories and cultural heritage, economic and social structures, and other relevant characteristics within the framework of this Constitution and the national sovereignty as well as territorial integrity of the Philippines or the Republic of the Philippines." Section 18, Article 10 reads, "The Congress shall enact an organic act for each autonomous region, with the assistance and participation of the Regional Consultative Commission composed of representatives appointed by the presidents from the list of nominees from multi-sectoral bodies. The Organic Act shall define the basic structure of government for the region consisting of the executive department and legislative assembly, both of which shall be elective and representative of the constituent political units. The Organic Act shall likewise provide a special court with personal, family, property law jurisdiction, consistent with the provisions of this Constitution and national laws. The creation of autonomous region shall be effective when approved by a majority of votes cast in a plebiscite hold for the purpose, provided that only provinces, cities, municipalities, and geographic areas voting favorably in such plebiscite shall be included in the autonomous region." So that's the content of Article 10 in the Constitution or 1987 Constitution, talking about the autonomy or autonomous region for Cordillera and the Muslim Mindanao. So, in the trip towards attaining autonomous region or autonomy in the Cordillera, we have this plebiscite of the 1990 and 1998. Now, There are some reasons why this did not succeed, and here it is. Pursuant to the Philippine Constitution, a plebiscite on RA 6766, an act providing for an organic act for the Cordillera Autonomous Region, enacted by the Congress on October 23, 1989, was held on January 30, 1990. The main advocate groups on autonomy and various leading personalities, including politicians, were not united in their stand. Some supported the campaign for the Organic Act, others were opposed to it and campaigned against it. All the Cordillera provinces under CAR, except the province of Ifugao, voted against this Organic Act. So this was the first plebiscite in the 1990. So like I said, ever since this a clamor for autonomous region started, we ourselves, the Cordilleras, are fighting against each other. We have some misunderstanding that we cannot solve before facing the real big problem. Now, researchers and members of the academy and individuals came up with the following reasons for the failure of the first plebiscite. So these are some of the reasons. Number one is, so take note, all the provinces in the Cordillera except Ifugao voted against it. Now here we have this lack of inadequate information about autonomy law and the concept of autonomy itself. A very short campaign period of only 2 months. Misinformation on autonomy and various provisions of the Organic Act. Non-readiness of people for autonomy. And people playing safe by voting no to what they did not understand. And campaign fund channeled to COMELEC. Those are some of the main reasons why this plebiscite of the 1990 failed. Next, so the plebiscite is where people will be voting yes or no on a certain issue of the country. Now, I think the question here is, are you in favor of Cordillera Autonomous Region, yes or no? And of course, there are some provisions of the autonomous region there that must be explained to the voter. Now, it did not prosper. So moving on, Malacanang believed that its first Organic Act was ratified and that Ifugao alone could constitute the autonomous region. So accordingly, they said that because Ifugao voted, Ifugao can represent all the provinces of the region, so they can now just go on with the forming of the Cordillera Autonomous Region. So it issued calls for winding up of the regional bodies created under the EO 220. Congress passed the RA 6861 providing for the election of regional officials of the autonomous region. COMELEC prepared for the election. In the meanwhile, the CBA-CPLA challenging Malacanang's and COMELEC's position in the Supreme Court eventually won. And the court's ruling is given, okay, in the paper. Now, if you want to read it, you can just go on. So, the group who went against this is the CBA-CPLA. We are not sure what's the reason, but they went against the decision to just push through with the forming of the Cordillera Autonomous Region just after the plebiscite in 1990, and they challenged that position in the Supreme Court, and they eventually won. So the formation of the autonomous region was not or did not push through. A second plebiscite for Second Organic Act, or the RA 8438, enacted by the Congress on December 22, 1997, was held on March 9, 1998. It was likewise rejected by all the province under CAR, except this time, in the province of Apayao, it won. Now, by then, Apayao is now a separate province from Kalinga. The following were the reasons of the failure of the second plebiscite as gathered by some researchers who interviewed several informants. So these are some of the reasons why the second plebiscite did not push through, or I mean, uh, the Cordillera Autonomous Region did not push through during the second plebiscite. So we have this limited campaign again from February 5 to March 5, 1998. So it took like 1 month. Next is the copies of the Organic Act were released and distributed only in the first 2 weeks of February. Delayed release of the plebiscite funds to the COMELEC, which announced that the plebiscite may be reset. Delayed release of Information and Education Fund on the Organic Act. Channeling of the IEC funds to the governors and city mayors, which caused suspicion that the funds would be used for the politicians' campaign in the election, which was not far away from the date of the plebiscite. Ban on political advertisement, which included IEC on the plebiscite. Very active no campaign by church groups, members of the FLAG, I'm not sure what it is. Persistent mis or disinformation on many provisions of the Organic Act, causing fears among voters, particularly the DEC and other government employees. Questionable leadership credibility. Many believe that incumbent politicians will run for regional offices. After the second rejection, there were no groups really determined to push a third Organic Act in the immediate future up to 2010. There were some attempts by few individuals, but these attempts were not able to have solid support. The Cordillera Administrative Regional Development Council started discussing a third try, but to my understanding, its timetable for a third plebiscite is several years or even a decade or more away. So we're still waiting for the third plebiscite because right now they have another Organic Act, and I haven't seen or read it, but we're waiting that we might be having a third plebiscite just maybe in the near future. The opposition to EO 220 and the attempts to abolish it. So like we said a while ago, there are some oppositions to the Executive Order 220. The constitutionality of EO 220 was raised to the Supreme Court by the CBC and a group of 4 individuals. Now, they argued that the EO 220 created an interim autonomous region of the Cordilleras, thus contravening the Constitution. The group of 4 persons argued that issuing 220, the President, in the exercise of her legislative powers prior to the convening of the First Congress under the 1987 Constitution, has virtually preempted Congress from its mandated task of enacting an Organic Act and created an autonomous region in the Cordillera. The Supreme Court consolidated the 2 petitions, and in January 29, 1990, it dismissed the petition as unfounded or lack of merit, among other things, the court said. Now, I don't want to be reading this, but anyway, let's just read it for those lawyers listening. So the EO 220 did not establish an autonomous government. It created a region covering a specified area for administrative purpose with the main objective of coordinating the planning and implementation of programs and services. The bodies created do not supplant the existing local government structures, nor are they autonomous governmental agencies. They merely constitute the mechanism for an umbrella that brings together the existing local governments, the agencies of the national government, the ethno-linguistic groups of tribes, and non-governmental organizations in a concerted effort toward development in the Cordillera. The CAR is not public corporation or a territorial political subdivision. It does not have a separate and juridical personality, unlike provinces, cities, and municipalities. Speculation and a resort to probabilities are insufficient to cause invalidation of EO 220. So that is the statement of the Supreme Court with regards to the proposed abolition of the EO 220. So Cordillera alone separately filed 7 bills seeking for the abolition of EO 220 and creating an ordinary region for the Cordilleras. There were also 2 Senate bills seeking the same purpose. None of these bills have reached second or third reading. Very good. Right? So there are some people.
This podcast is brought to you by Millennial Tech. Millennial Tech could ma-repair the printer, ma-install the CCTV, repair the cellular phone, computer, and other electrical appliances. For more information, mabali na ibisita nyo daida at Kubo Building, Proper Abatan, Bugyas, Benguet, or you can contact them through their cell phone number 0910-255-0382, or you can visit their Facebook page, Millennial Tech.
Trying to abolish the EO 220, which led to the establishment of the Cordillera Administrative Region. And like what the Supreme Court said, the Cordillera Autonomous Region is not an autonomous government. It is merely an umbrella for mechanism to centralize the services coming from the national government, right? So number 10, the Supreme Court decision relative to the Cordillera Autonomy. The first decision of the Supreme Court regarding to the autonomy in the Cordillera was the first petition of the CBA-CPLA challenging the position of the executive branch that the first Organic Act was ratified, even if only Ifugao Province alone voted favorably. On December 4, 1990, the Supreme Court in Ordillo et al. Ruled that one province alone cannot constitute an autonomous region. The court stated, "Wherefore the petition is hereby granted resolution number 2259 of the Commission on Election insofar as it upholds the creation of autonomous region, February 14, 1990 Memorandum of the Secretary of Justice, the February 5, 1990 Memorandum of the Executive Secretary Administration Order Number 160 and Republic Act Number 6861 are declared null and void, while Executive Order Number 220 is declared to be still in force and effect until properly repealed or amended." So that is the ruling again in the position before of the executive branch, that even if Ifugao is the only one voted for the first Organic Act, that they can always push through. So a Cordillera region, the province, as according to the Supreme Court, the province must be in unison agreeing to the Organic Act. That is the, what do you call this one? That is the statement or the stand of the Supreme Court. So in the observation and concluding remark of the one who wrote this paper, in the struggle of the Cordillera, or struggle for contemporary Cordillera regional autonomy, various advocate groups and community leaders were not united on the content of an Organic Act as well as its formulation and information process. Some campaigned for the Organic Act passed by Congress, while others campaigned against them. The pursuit of Cordillera regional autonomy had been decorated with splits between and within groups, with protest and counter-protest, with petitions and counter-petitions, with court cases and counter-court cases, and many more showing the intellectual finesse, accommodation of opinion, and vibrancy of the Cordillerans. The making of third organic act, to my mind, is unlikely in the next 3 years or until 2010. This note or article was written in 2009 because there are no groups or local governments units strongly advocating and lobbying for it. The Cordillera Solons are not yet one and eager in pushing it. The move to change the present constitution with a federal form of government threatens or is sidelining the pursuit for Cordillera regional autonomy under the 1987 Constitution provision. A Cordillera federal state, for that matter, may not be found in a federal Republic of the Philippines. The Cordilleras may just be a part of a larger state. This is according to a concept way back in the 2010 early 2000s of having this constitutional convention for a federal state or Republic of the Philippines. It did not push through. Despite its drawbacks, mal and misinformations, EO 220 is superior to an ordinary region. It had the following gains. So even though this EO 220 is being contradicted by other groups in the Cordilleras, it is still something, it has brought something good in the region of the Cordilleras. And this is the following gains according to the author. It created the Cordillera Administrative Region. While politicians and other groups ask for a separate region for the provinces under the old mountain province, their effort did not succeed. It brought about the establishment of various regional offices and national departments, thus causing employment of thousands of Cordillerans, many of whom were appointed to high positions such as regional directors, assistant regional directors, or section heads, which was quite difficult for native Cordillerans to get when the Cordillera provinces were either in Region 1 or in Region 2. Like the story that I am stating a while back of a teacher applying for a job, and then he was about to bring his paper to the regional office in La Union. And then here comes another teacher from the lowlands telling, already having with him his appointment paper that he was already appointed for that position, for that vacant position. And the people in the lowland, in the regional office, didn't even consider the applicant from the highlands. Those are some of the stories way back in the time that the Cordilleras were either in Region 1 or Region 2. Now, the creation of the Cordillera Administrative Region brought positive change. Like some or majority of the people working in the regional offices of the Cordilleras were natives of Cordillera, and that is something that this EO 220 has brought. It brought about a better climate of peace and security in the region. There was relatively less destruction to government properties and installation by armed groups, and counterinsurgency expenses of the military in the Cordillera was greatly reduced. It pushed forward a Cordillera-wide consciousness of identity. A greater majority of the people of the Cordillera now prefer to be called Cordillerans rather than Igorot, thus enhancing the feeling among Cordillerans as one people or one nation. It is one thing to sign a peace agreement and another thing to implement it properly. One thing to implement it properly. The perusal of the RA 837, otherwise known as the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act of 1997, shows that much of the demands of the autonomy advocates, such as rights to ancestral lands or domains, rights to cultural integrity, right to decide on the use of development of natural resources, etc., were recognized in this law. So, just to sum it up, so that is the bloody path of the creation of the Cordillera Administrative Region. So we can see the rocky road that it went through, right? And that the first and the glaring thing that I observed here is that these groups of the Cordillerans are the one fighting among themselves of what should be done, what should be, or the vision. Each of this group has their different vision on how or what a Cordillera Autonomous Region should look like. Now, just to give some background here for those who are not living in the Cordilleras, the Cordillera region, though we for some untrained eye, we look the same, but they should not look at it that way, because in reality, we do look the same, but each province, and within the province, each what do you call that one, barrio, has a different culture. It's only because of the Americans that the Americans maybe thought that we are all the same, but actually we are not. From province to province, we have different cultures. Now, of course, having grown up from a different culture and then trying to reconcile those things it's a very difficult endeavor. So looking at this thing that happened here, tracing the history of the Cordillera Administrative Region going to attaining its autonomy, we can see that each of the groups has a different vision, though this one is showing that people in the Cordilleras have this idea of autonomy, and they have already the idea on how to govern themselves independently. It shows that they can stand on their own, and they have inherited the independence that their forefathers had been practicing even way back, right? So we don't, maybe perhaps this is not a negative thing, although it extended the duration of the journey for quite some times. Now, take note that the formation of this autonomous Cordillera Administrative Region was in 1987, and today is 2022. 1987 to 2022. It's as my age. I was born in 1987, so it took a long time. But who knows? Maybe because of the discussion, because of the disagreements that is being discussed properly by these intellectuals of the Cordilleras, that we might come up with an ideal or a model of an autonomous region that can be that we can show proudly around the world. It might take a long time, like they said. There's no good thing that comes easy, right? So we are hoping that in the third Organic Act, we can come up, and all of the groups pushing for this would come up with a good system of an autonomous region, and would agree on the provisions, and would be proud to say that this thing that they work hard for is going to lead, or going to bring, foster more development in the Cordillera region, and that every Cordillerans will be very, very proud to say that I came from the Cordillera Autonomous region. So that is the history of the Cordillera Administrative Region and the road it is taking to go and achieve the autonomy to be called the Cordillera Autonomous Region. And again, this paper was written by Fernando Bahatan Jr. And I'll be seeing you again in the next podcast. And still, for solo podcasts, we'll be talking about histories of the Igorots or the Cordillerans. And from time to time, we'll be talking to someone. And this is another episode of El Maestro Speaks podcast. And I'll be seeing you in the next one. Bye-bye.